All right. Welcome, everybody, to the first edition of the TechWadi webinar series. We will be bringing you topics from investors, entrepreneurs, founders in the Middle East and here in Silicon Valley once a month. You will have live viewing rooms as you do right now, and thanks to our partners in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Ramallah, Gaza, Amman, Beirut, and Cairo. So thank you all for joining in person. You'll get the advantage of being able to interact and ask questions towards the end. The topic of today's webinar is MENAscapes.com, which we launched just a few weeks ago. It's an effort to bring transparency and awareness to the startup ecosystem and investing landscape in the Middle East. So we hope you enjoy it, and thank you to Rising Tide, who's our sponsor for this first webinar. So I talked about the topic for this webinar being the MENAscapes.com website that we launched, and this is just an effort to show transparency for the region of what's going on by country, by sector, different stages of funding and investment, and hopefully just be a free online resource for everyone in region and out of region. We have live viewing parties, as I mentioned. Thank you to Flat 6 Labs, Abu Dhabi, Cairo, and Jeddah, and the Crib in Dubai, Tech Hub in Beirut, Impact Hub in Dubai, the Zain Innovation Center in Amman, and Leaders E-Zone in Ramallah, and newly added Gaza Sky Geeks in Gaza. You'll also be able to view live stream on our YouTube channel, and we'll be sharing the link on social media for that, so that you can join live from anywhere in the world. I'm giving everyone a second here to join in from the different locations. All right, we're ready to go live. Thanks all for your patience, and thank you for everyone joining in the viewing partner locations. This wouldn't have been possible without our first sponsor, Rising Tide, so thank you very much. Rising Tide is a Silicon Valley venture capital firm with strong roots in the US, Canada, Europe, and the Middle East. We're very fortunate to have them. So we launched MENAscapes in May of we actually started working on it in May last year. Ramzi Ismail from Flat 6 Labs, Abu Dhabi, and myself. Our mission was really just to collect all the information we could about funding, exits, the investment landscape, and startup ecosystem in the Middle East, to shed light on what was going on there. Because from everything that we could tell, not everybody could tell, was aware of all the great things that were happening there, specifically to close the loop on venture startups and venture investment, which is exits. So we wanted to bring that to the forefront, and we launched the first few slides or maps of the site a couple weeks ago. So today we're going to talk about MENAscapes, some of the initial insights that we've learned from it, and some of the trends to think about for 2016. I'm Sharif El-Badawi, founder of MENAscapes. I'm also the co-chair and head mentor at TechWadi, and a partner lead for VCs and startups at Google. You can follow me at Sel-Badawi on Twitter, and you can hashtag the webinar at hashtag SV2MENA live, and at TechWadi.org. All right, so here's the site. It's MENAscapes.com. I mentioned myself and Ramzi, and since we launched, maybe a dozen or so contributors have raised their hand to help us out. This is meant to be an open source, community-based resource for everyone, so feel free to contribute. If you see something wrong, missing, or needs to be added to it, just let us know. And if you want to be a contributor, email us at info@menascapes.com. We are grouping together folks by different categories of responsibilities to help maintain the site, sort of like a Wikipedia that can live on forever and be a resource to everyone. We expect that the audience of this to be folks in the Middle East who are in the ecosystem, but also really folks outside of the Middle East. So in Europe and Asia, Africa, Latin America, and of course the US and Silicon Valley. I think it's really important for Silicon Valley investors to see what's going on, and this is a perfect way to provide a reference for them all in one place in a very visual way. So the reason we created it is, number one, just to bring awareness. It was really important for us to make sure that the things that you guys were all doing in the Middle East were things that the rest of the world was taking note of. And specifically around exits and funding events, it's really important to let folks outside of Middle East know what's happening there. So awareness was the number one goal for us. The second was transparency. I think we often heard, whenever we visit entrepreneurs in the region and investors, we hear that different sides of the story. Investors say we can't really find good entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs say there aren't any investors around. But when we took a deeper look, there actually are a number of investors and tons of great talent around, but they weren't very out there. And we wanted to make sure that we could provide a resource to make it so that you could see all the investors in your region, know who they are, know who all the incubators are and the accelerators, and be able to level the playing field a little bit. And the third one is something that we hope will start after we put up the first few maps, which is insights. Maps alone are static, and there's a reason why we decided to go with maps and not a directory like Magnet or Wassel or any of the other ones out there. Those are great, and it's a very needed resource. But we specifically focused on visual maps because visual maps tell a story and in a very relational way. And we think when you see all the investors in the region on a slide by investment stage, it gives you a sense of what's really happening in a more qualitative way. So it's a great complement to what others are doing, and we hope you enjoy it. Anyone who's heard me talk about the ecosystem and transplanting what we have in Silicon Valley to other regions has probably seen this slide. But this is a slide I think I like to emphasize a few things on. Number one is exits. You wouldn't have an ecosystem if you don't have exits. They're at least not a venture ecosystem for startups. So those are important, and we need to highlight those. And it turns out that most of the Western world thinks that there's been one or two exits in the Middle East. Maktub 2010, and very few can name a second one. Well, it turns out that that's not true. There are at least 33 exits just in the last 10 years, and 22 happened in the last 12 months, and I'll speak about that in a little bit. The other thing is talent. The Middle East has great talent in the region, and in each country we're starting to see different characteristics emerge for what type of talent exists, and it will be a nice shared resource for everyone to have. We think that when you have more founders and more academics or students interested in
It was going.
Okay, so can everyone hear me now? Seems like there was a sound problem. Do I need to go back? Okay, I'm being told I'm going to go back 3 slides, so I'm going back. Okay, I'm going to continue on from here. Sorry for anyone who was missing sound. The reason why we created MENAscapes is 3 primary reasons, and we're sticking to these reasons for the long haul. There is no plan to turn this into a business or anything. It's an open resource for the community. Number 1 is to bring awareness for what's happening in the community to the community itself, but also to the outside world, to the Europe, Asia, Middle East, Asia, Europe, and the U.S. to make sure that that customers, partners, and investors are aware of what's happening in the region. Transparency is very important as well. I think to level the playing field a little bit in the region so that entrepreneurs know all the choices that they have, to let investors know what's going on, where concentration of sectors is happening, where exits are happening, so hopefully give some kind of qualitative insight into that. And insight in general. I think as we see the maps move month to month, that's where it's going to really add really cool insight into what's happening in the region, and we'll be able to share more as that comes. One slide I like to show, just to show like sort of the importance of different components of an ecosystem, especially forming in an emerging market. You don't have to do anything in Silicon Valley. You could do it all from where you are, as long as you have internet and a computer, and these components, right? And those are founders being able to have access to capital, access to hiring strong talent, and then a user base, a customer base or a user base to use your product or service, and then of course exits or larger companies or public market for you to be able to liquidate some of your assets or be able to give your employees and founders and investors a way to exit. So exits are extremely important, and we're highlighting those in the MENAscapes slides. And then the other thing is talent, something that in the region we're not so used to yet, which is giving equity to all your employees at a startup, so that when a good exit event happens, all boats rise. So that'll create hopefully more founders, more students thinking about doing startups instead of just going and getting a job at a big company when they graduate, and hopefully more capital resources because you'll have more angel investors and mentors and advisors helping other founders out. So jumping right into our first MENAscapes slide here, this is on the MENA investment landscape. We've bucketed into a few different buckets: angel groups, accelerator funds, and those are accelerators which you'll see on our accelerators map, but who also do investment. So there's a handful of those. Corporate VCs, some of them have been around for quite some time. Early stage or stage agnostic VCs who do seed to Series A, Series B. We have probably some of the oldest MENA investors are in this bucket, and a ton of new ones who just joined in the last year. So creating a lot more choice for entrepreneurs. As the funnel starts to fill out, we also start to need later stage funding, and so we have late stage players down in the bottom left and private equity and family offices bottom right. The family offices one is interesting in particular for the Middle East because there are a lot of family offices, wealthy family offices there. And traditionally, investment in the Middle East has been investment banking and private equity, less on the venture side. So we're starting to see a small shift there. I'm not going to say it's been easy for VC funds to go and raise money from them, but it's getting better and it's getting easier. And obviously, all of these funds were created. Their LPs or the investors in these funds are coming from private equity firms, family offices, and government entities, and even foreign entities. So what does this mean for us? Number one, more capital sources means more competition for deal flow. The investors are going to start to have to hustle a little bit. They can't just sit back in their office and in one city, in one country, and expect all the entrepreneurs from the Middle East to go visit them. Now we're starting to see investors cross borders and go and hunt down deal flow themselves, talk to other VCs, try to see what's hot, because there's starting to be a lot of noise, and it's a lot harder to identify the good deals. So that's actually good for entrepreneurs, and it also creates better terms and more founder-friendly terms for the entrepreneurs, which is great. We start to see that they'll have more than one choice in funding, and this is happening now in what everyone seems to have identified as the funding gap, and it varies per country, of course, but we certainly see a funding gap from seed to Series A, and sometimes even pre-seed funding gaps if you may have won a competition prize of 50 to 100K and finding it hard to get to the $500,000 or $1 million mark. And now a lot of players have jumped in just to help in that stage, which is awesome. The second thing is more cross-border deals and country-by-country characteristics. I think we're going to start to see a lot more investors traveling across the region. This has already happened a lot in the last 2 months. We have deals happening where investors across borders are co-investing with each other quite a bit. It happened in the past, but they're starting to see that increase a lot. The other thing I think we're going to start to see in 2016, and I'm excited to share those maps with you, is as we start to see country-by-country characteristics on investments, talent, ease of starting up in that particular country, what the regulations are, or government support. And I think that's going to differ quite a bit by country. You see some of the countries already making announcements and statements that they want to foster entrepreneurship. So it's exciting to see how that's going to play out. Certainly, few countries in the Middle East have very large populations, which means a customer base and a user base, whereas other countries are much smaller, but they may have more talent and easier ways to do business or to just move around town to get things done. So those characteristics are going to be interesting for us to map over time. And the third thing that this is showing is that more startups will be maturing past the valley of death. As I mentioned, that funding gap, it was very pronounced, especially in the Middle East in the last 2 years. And we're hoping that all of these new investors coming in will help get entrepreneurs past that point. And I think an important point to make there is for entrepreneurs raising a seed round or an A round or any round, how do you know how much to raise? And that is all dependent on whether you're able to get to the next milestone. The reason there's a valley of death is people aren't raising enough to get to the next milestone, which would encourage the next round of investors to jump in at that point. So they take some money, they take whatever they can get, and of course that's understandable, but it's not enough typically to get them to a point that's compelling enough for the next round, and that's an issue. So hopefully more investors at all stages will help close that up. The next slide here that we wanted to show is that there are a lot of investors coming in from outside of the Middle East region investing in Middle Eastern companies. The largest here, which was a surprise to me actually, is from the US. We have very prominent names like 500 Startups, Y Combinator starting to look at the region, NEA, one of the oldest VCs here in the US, and several others, and of course our sponsor for today, Rising Tide, here in Silicon Valley, that have been pretty active in the region. I mean, 500 Startups has already done 30 different deals in the region without even before even announcing its own Middle Eastern fund, 500 Falcons, which just launched. In Singapore, South Africa, Sweden, Malaysia, all over Europe, as you can see here, there are a few investors who have picked up deals in the region, and that's super exciting. It offers validation and more sources, of course, for later rounds. And for any company that has a global focus or can have value outside of the Middle East, it's really important to reach out to foreign investors. so that they can help you integrate into these new regions. So outside money has increased at a dramatic rate. So just like MENA-based VCs increasing, we've seen a lot of outside VCs increasing their attention on MENA. So this is providing more market validation and opportunities for global expansion of customers, partners, investors, and exits. All right, the third map here we have is on the other players of the ecosystem. So aside from the entrepreneurs or the startups and the investors, there's a big focus in emerging markets on incubators, accelerators, and co-working spaces, essentially the enablers of an ecosystem. And these are very important, but as you can see here, it's easy to quickly over-index on this side of things. So what this tells you here is there are a lot of resources for you. You should not be banging your head as an entrepreneur and wondering, how to get help, or is anyone out there going through what you're going through. In every major country in the Middle East, there are multiple options, whether you're social impact focused, whether you're maker focused, hardware focused, or whatever, services or anything else. There are a lot of opportunities, and the difference here between accelerators, and I'll just go in actually reverse order. Co-working spaces are a place for you to work. So if you just need a space, and it's often a great way for you to network with others and get mentors. And then a kind of a step up from that would be an accelerator, a short-term program that you apply to and you get involved in. They help with mentoring, advising, coaching, connecting, introing with you to others that you need. It's a great cohort as well, just to be a part of any of these things, so that you can experience it with other entrepreneurs and maybe make connections that will help your business. There are a ton of these types of places now all over the Middle East. And then a stage up from accelerator, I would say, is incubator. And an incubator is a bit longer. They'll probably give you space and do all the things that an accelerator would do, but over a longer period of time, and really help get your startup from 0 to 10, even if it's just starting with an idea. So great resources all around. Some of them are public government entities. Some of them are private. Many of them I know, and they're really awesome to work with. There's a ton missing off of this slide, as many of you can tell. We haven't included all the countries yet that we've indexed, and so hopefully the next issue or the next month's versions will include more countries for you to see. There's roughly 22 countries in the Arab-speaking world that we intend to cover here. So what does this mean? From an ecosystem standpoint, or from a landscape perspective, the way it looks to me is it's providing a healthy funnel from the long tail. So there's a huge population in the Middle East, arguably the size of the US, or 350, 380 million people. And so there could be a lot of noise. And there is a startup trend happening in the region, a startup buzz going on where everyone wants to be an entrepreneur. And that's great. But we have to filter through the noise a little bit. And I think prepare entrepreneurs, founders, and teams to be presentable, to polish their pitches, to understand business terms, understand growth, and the technology that they're using, and how to make it useful for customers, or presentable to investors. And that's where incubators and accelerators and co-working spaces really come into play. They really help entrepreneurs get more mature in their thinking and in their presentation. So I think it's healthy to have a large funnel to pick from, and then make those founders more prepared, because certainly there's a lot to learn from other ecosystems who have been doing it for 5, 10, 15 years. Here in Silicon Valley, of course, is one of the better known ones. But because of this, I think we have to be able to filter through a lot of the noise. I initially almost had an allergic reaction to everyone when I kept meeting folks who were saying they're fostering entrepreneurship in the region, because you know, in a simple term, you're either a founder or you're an investor. And of course, that's not 100% true. You're not just a founder or investor. We need a lot of these resources out there. So I'm glad they're there. After having spent, I think, a few more trips in the region, we certainly need them because we need the funnel to filter itself out as it rises to the top. And these are great systems to do that. So in terms of countries, I mentioned in the beginning that we're starting to see different characteristics, and they'll start to cause a little controversy here. But ABCD, or what I've learned is called, Amman, Beirut, Cairo, and Dubai, seem to be getting all the attention. And now I think that story kind of ended last year. Those four cities in those countries will certainly continue to get a lot of attention. But we're starting to see a lot more focus in other areas as well. So while Morocco, which is probably Morocco, Egypt are the largest in terms of ecosystem players like accelerators and incubators. They even have a lot of investors in Morocco. It wasn't heard about a lot until just the last year. And if you're Moroccan, you're probably saying, of course we heard about it. But I'm just saying from a perspective of the other countries. So now it's getting talked about quite a bit. It also has a large population. Algeria has a large population. And I think if you look at the ones to watch for in terms of both a customer base, a user base, and technical talent, and we're starting to see Algeria, Saudi Arabia, and Iran as ones to watch for this year. It'll be very interesting as Iran opens up, and their scientific and engineering talent is shared with the rest of the Middle East. All right, so moving on to one of the best slides, I think one of the most important slides of the presentation is the MENA acquisitions and exits. This is extremely important for the cycle to continue in the region and for entrepreneurship and to get the funding that they need and the validation that they need from the outside world. So we mapped out by sector here. We've you see media, social, enterprise, financial tech, gaming, commerce, and on-demand. It's very funny that the on-demand, all the food delivery companies all got snatched up within just a couple years. And we'll start to see consolidation like that. And when we start to post up the startup slides, you'll see how the consolidation starts to move sectors around. And as an entrepreneur or investor, you're looking for where there are gaps in a certain space. If there are not enough startups, independent startups, still doing that particular thing, if they're getting acquired or not. Those will be the most interesting things, I think, for the future of MENAscapes and things to watch out for. So, for example, if all the food delivery companies in the Middle East got bought by parent companies, will they continue to operate independently, or will that leave room for new innovation to happen from the ground level by new entrepreneurs in that space? And we'll start to see that across all of these areas. Probably the two biggest ones historically have been media and commerce, but I think we're going to start to see enterprise and fintech on the rise as we have in the last few months. The other thing that we're going to see, especially in the Middle East, is that startups are solving real big problems. They're doing it from a social impact perspective, and they're doing it from real world problems that large businesses face. The more that we see startups doing that, rather than just creating, the next social app or something like that for fun, the more that they'll see big businesses looking at it to innovate in their own enterprises and looking to startups to acquire to help them do that or partner with. So that'll be very good. We're starting to see that the phrase necessity drives innovation isn't more true than it is in the Middle East, where environmental factors and other factors surrounding entrepreneurs are forcing them to innovate and to really rely on themselves to do great things. I think startups and entrepreneurship are the only outlet to do that. The other thing that we're seeing is more outside money will enter the region. So as exits happen, outside companies will come in looking for the right deals to help them expand in the region or gain the IP and technology or team that they need to fill out their offerings. So more outside money from that perspective. And then also more outside money from venture capital firms who have just been waiting to pounce on the Middle East, but afraid to do so if they're not going to realize any returns on their investment. And without exits, there are no returns. So on the totem pole around the world of regions to be looking at, the Middle East has not traditionally been in the top 10. And I think there's still ways to go, but certainly we are climbing very quickly as exits increase dramatically and exponentially in just the last year, as we'll show in a bit. The other thing I touched on is just the sector concentration. I think that we'll continue to seek sectors that do very well in the Middle East, and that's going to create pools of talent who have a lot of experience and history in those sectors, and they'll continue to do second and third companies. We'll also see new sectors emerge as entrepreneurs start to realize that instead of just solving the very obvious problem of, let's say, selling products online or helping deliver goods, they will be able to expand beyond that to a lot of broader selection of sectors. And that'll be very interesting. I don't think we've been able to see that much in the past, and I expect that to actually to start to become much more apparent in 2016. The great thing about the story here for the Middle East is that, sure, there were not a lot of exits, and they weren't very well known in the past, although can't let them criticize and say that there weren't any, because there were some very significant ones acquired by Vodafone, acquired by IBM, and acquired by a lot of big international companies, but they were just lesser known. Nowadays, we're tracking them in a lot better way than we have in the past, and if you just look at the last 10 years, there's been at least 36 exits, probably more, that are hard to just dig up. And then in the last 12 months alone, we've seen 22 exits, and that is phenomenal. That is a game changer compared to just a year before. So anywhere you hear, what are the exits in the Middle East now, you can point to them, you can reference them on the landscape here, and we expect this to continue to rise, because as all those things that we showed you so far, the ecosystem players increasing dramatically in every country, the governments fostering entrepreneurship as much as they can in each country, number of investors at every stage, multiplied by 10x, all of that is going to lead to more startups, more founders, better technologies, better access, and hopefully with more awareness we'll be able to create more exit opportunities. Just to kind of summarize here, there's a sort of pyramid of needs for the ecosystem, and we talked about at the very bottom just accelerators, incubators, co-working spaces, and how important they are for the region, and thankfully we have hundreds of them now. We have lots and lots of early stage and corporate venture capital available, so I encourage entrepreneurs to shop around, and to all my investor friends, hustle as much as you can, try to get the best deals out there. And then late stage and foreign venture capital, what's really important here is that they need the deal flow. So they need these companies to get funded early, and for the talent to rise to the top, for the metrics to show up and to the right, so that they have something to fund at the later stages, Series B, Series C. So while there's only a need for fewer of these, they're going to be looking for deals coming in up the funnel. And that's really important for us to be able to foster very strong deals and fund them well, so that they can go on to Series B and C. Above that, we see private equity. It's a little blurry in the region what private equity is versus venture capital, I'll admit. But there are some squarely in the private equity space or holdings. You'll see a lot of holding investment companies that they typically buy large chunks of these startups, sometimes over 51% of the startup, to control ownership of it, and then manage multiple properties online or businesses online. And there are several of those, and that model sometimes works very well for the region. So far, I think we've counted 31 acquirers, and that's probably a low number as well. Probably about half of these are names that you've heard of from an acquirer perspective. Vodafone, I mentioned IBM before, Rocket Internet. So there are some that are certainly well known, but we can't target the same ones all the time. So if you're a founder in a startup, you need to diversify and not think about, hey, these two buyers are the potential buyers for me, I'm just going to build towards that goal. We need to expand this set as well, and hopefully that'll happen in the next couple years as choice increases. Threw in a bonus landscape slide that Ramzi and I had worked on, and this is the MENA startup competitions that we're starting to index as well. So you'll have one place to look for all the competitions happening in your region. We'll share the dates and locations for all of these and any criteria that they're looking for. Luckily, they're specialized. Many of them are specialized either for women or social impact or hardware, which is really nice, I think, to see this. If I was an entrepreneur or a student looking for getting my name out there and getting exposure, these competitions are a great way to get from $0 to $50,000 or $0 to $100,000 just to ideate on your project and get some kind of minimal viable product up and running before you go raise capital. All right, so just to summarize here, and then we can open it up to some questions. First thing I would say is that support for entrepreneurs at all stages is more available than ever before. So it's a very exciting time to get involved. Get involved as a mentor, an entrepreneur, an investor. Any side of the cycle is great and welcomed, and there are lots of resources for you to tap into. I think the other thing here to notice is that with more choice, transparency, and knowledge sharing, we're going to see a much more controlled ecosystem where you don't have people complaining, let's say, as much on the entrepreneur side or the investor side, because the information is out there, it's available and equally distributed to everyone. We like to see entrepreneurs also helping each other, and with more resources online and stories being told by awesome journalists all around the region and outside the region focused on MENA, we're starting to see a lot more knowledge sharing as well, so starting to change the culture of youth in the Middle East, which I think is just fantastic. The third one here is the regions. The region is growing exponentially in all aspects of the cycle. We saw exits, and that was truly like a spike just in the last year. Number of investors has also spiked. I can't think of two more important things than number of investors and exits. Everything else is also growing exponentially, so great that that's happening as well. So it's very exciting to see what's going to be going on. One more lesson just for fun. I learned a lot of how not to design the logo. Just when putting these landscapes together, you can tell a lot of them are very text heavy. They don't do well when they're bunched up together with a bunch of other logos and not very large. So to anyone out there who's looking at their logo on the landscape and it doesn't look great, I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned about how to design a logo, not to have widely varying font sizes in the same logo, because it's either going to look too big or too small. It's hard to get them both to be legible. So that's more of a fun one, but something definitely noticeable about Middle Eastern entities versus entities here in the US. All right, so what's next for us? We are working diligently with our contributors team on the next set of slides, which is the startup landscapes. These are where it gets really exciting. Who's getting funding? What sectors are growing? We'll tell you where the talent seems to be grouping together, and you'll see the exits right on the landscape. So if you're looking at a particular sector like e-commerce, we'll show you among the 20, 30 players of e-commerce which 5 or 6 have exited. So it gives you a sense of, if you're a new entrepreneur thinking about what to build next, looking at these landscapes will hopefully give you insight into the movement of the needs in the region, where there is a lot of concentration and competition versus where there might be a gap or a vacuum in a certain sector that nobody is addressing. So look forward to those, and you can subscribe to MENAscapes.com. Just go on the website and subscribe, and we'll alert you when new maps are uploaded. All right, so I'll open it up to Q&A. Feel free to unmute if you're in one of our viewing rooms and ask a live question.